Chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes may sound familiar to some of you that are 50-ish. It's stuck in my mind. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. I mean, I was laying in bed last night. I can't get out of my mind. I was thinking all this morning, what a great song. Just old Roger McGuinn and those guys. They stole it. To everything, there is a season, a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get, a time to lose. For everybody with an attic and a garage, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend, to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. And what profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. And he hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has set the world, your translation may say eternity, that's better, in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. What is Solomon saying here? And I really encourage you as you read through the book of Ecclesiastes, some have taken this as Solomon writing as a backslidden man, Solomon writing from a carnal frame of mind, Solomon writing in his despair and dark days. I really don't believe that. Solomon in the last chapter, and I believe he's writing as an older man who has seen the vanity of his days, how he's wasted years, and yet realizes that God is still giving him an opportunity to speak to a younger generation. In the last chapter, he says, those of you that are in your youth, take joy in those days of your youth because you'll say bye-bye to them someday. I mean, I need glasses to read that now. He talks about that there. And he says, in the final analysis, man is called to fear God and to serve him all of his days, to keep his commandments. And he takes everyone to some place that's higher. The book is constantly couched 29 times under the phrase of under heaven. These are the things that happen under heaven. And Solomon had lived in that frustration. He had started out on fire with the Lord. He had started out loving the Lord, but he had cooled and indulged as the years went on. And then it seems that in his old age, he's looking back and he's saying, no, there is another perspective that we might have. He's not just saying, and I believe some people can take this like that these things wash over us in life and there is nothing that we can do about it. Time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up. This sounds like the first chapter. The generations come, generations go, and the sun rises and the sun sets, and the wind blows north, the wind blows south, and then the rivers run to the sea, and the water evaporates, and it falls back down in rain, and then back in the river, runs back down. It almost sounds like he's in that mode. Here we are on the treadmill of life, and you can't get off of it, and really we're just victims of fate. And you're stuck in life. And 28 times in these first 8 verses, he says time, the word time. Time for this, time for that. There's a time for this and a time for that. But he does say that there is a purpose. For every purpose, a time. For every purpose under heaven. A time to be born. We didn't have much to do with that, did we? Before you knew it, you were laying in a crib screaming somewhere. You really didn't have much to do with that. Time to be born. And a time to die. We don't really have much to do with that either. Juicers, diets. Time to be born. Some of you are depression babies. Some of you are babies that cause depression. Some of you were born and the doctor smacked your mother instead of smacking you. You know, you hear all these are jokes, you hear all this stuff. I'm not depressed like Solomon, so I can. A time to die. Beyond our control. It can leave you feeling completely helpless and impotent and the victim of these tides, endless tides of life. A time to plant and a time to uproot that which is planted. Not just, it would be the field much in his day, but to plant a business, to plant a ministry, to plant a family. And inevitably, there's a time to uproot that which is planted. There's a time to kill. And it doesn't seem to be talking about premeditated murder here, like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder, but there's a time when the Israelites came into the land and cleaned out the Canaanites by God's order. There's a time when an adulterer was taken and stoned to death. There were capital crimes. There's a time, but there's a time to heal. That's the contrast, a time to give our lives to see someone mend and get back on their feet. There is a time to break down and a time to build up. Now, that goes emotionally too, doesn't it? You've been breathing for any length of time. You know that there's a time in life when we break down and we fall apart. And then there's a time to build up. Certainly that goes on many levels. A time to weep. There is a time to weep, isn't there? It's not unmanly. It's not immature. It's not non-spiritual to cry. God has given us tear ducts. Jesus came into the world in human flesh with tear ducts, and it says that Jesus wept. There is a time to weep and a time to laugh. You don't want to mix those seasons up. You don't want to be laughing while someone else is weeping. It's insensitive and it can be painful. And you don't want to be weeping when someone else is rejoicing over something, but there's a time for it. And seasons certainly that are not to be confused. There's a time to mourn, and there is. And there's a time to dance, to rejoice. There is a time to cast away stones. Stones that maybe you were going to throw at somebody else, certainly in this day, clearing the field of stones. But there's a time to gather stones together, to build, to establish a memorial crossing the Jordan River. They put a pile of stones to remind them that God had made the way. There's a time to build those memorials in our lives and to build our homes. There's a time to gather stones together. There is a time to embrace, to demonstrate love, to give affirmation. And there's a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time of confrontation. There's a time to get and a time to lose. Many ruined lives by trying to hold on, not acknowledging before Almighty God, Lord, there is a time to let go. There's a time to lose. There's a time to keep, and again, there is a time to throw your junk out, a time to cast away. You know, some people are hoarders. One man's trash is another man's treasure. I know that. You can see all the wives patting their husbands. You're the guy who drives down the street with this. That's why you wanted a pickup truck, so you could collect junk. And you know, you can't just let your wife do it because she throws out the good stuff. You come home, your treasures are by the curb. You have to move them back up into the garage again. You know. But I've been in people's homes, and it's it's just a fire trap. You think, what are they saving? All this, throw this stuff out. The world will rejoice if you get rid of them. There's a time to cast away. A time to rend, to tear. And certainly in that culture, it was a time of grief. The garment was torn. And it was a time of brokenheartedness. But there's a time of mending, of sewing, of replacing. The time to keep silent. It's hard, isn't it? We all know it. There are those days we should just shut up. There's a time to keep silent. And you know, it's like it wants to come out. But you know that if you open it up and let it out, you're going to pay the price for months after that. Now, there's a time. There is a time to keep silent. And there's a time to speak. I think more often than not, we regret things we did say more than we regret things that we didn't say. No doubt there will be times we'll look back and wish that we had shared the good news, the love of God, with someone that we didn't share the love of God with. Maybe we had been too judgmental or we hadn't said anything at all. So there's a time to speak. There's a time to keep silent. I encourage all of you who have children that you're estranged from over some stupid argument. There was a time to throw something out in the attic and you didn't do it and you fought over it. Or parents that you're estranged from, and yet in your heart you still love them and it's painful. Or brothers and sisters. There's a time to keep silent, but there's a time to speak. And I really encourage you to take the time to say the things you need to say while there's time to say them. I have some great talks with my mom and dad, and whenever God's time is for them, I will not live the rest of my life thinking, I wish I had taken the time to say some things. I've said them. You should do that. Don't let it slip away. It's incumbent upon you. You're the believer. You're the Christian. There's a time to keep silent. There's a time to speak. There's a time to love. Amen. There's a time to hate. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, it says there's 6 things that God hates. Yea, 7 are an abomination to him. There's things that we are to hate. But that's the only correct moral response in this world. We should hate some of the injustice and some of the perversion and some of the tyranny that we see. There's a time for that. And ultimately, there's a time of war, difficult, costly, and a time of peace. And what is Solomon saying? Is he saying, this just goes over us like the first chapter, generations come, generations go, the water runs down to the sea, the sun rises, there's a time of love and a time of hate, a time to get married and a time, to be born and a time to die. It sounds like the circle of life. I feel like I need, Mufasa and Simba here to talk to me or something, and Elton John to sing me a song. This is the circle of life. I need Disney to cheer me up, because this is the circle of life, and just be encouraged because the old lions die and the young lions come in and they beat the hyenas and then they stand on a rock and everybody sings the song again. That's so stupid. I'm not encouraged in the circle of life. We're just here temporary and then we get killed by hyenas and some young lion takes our place. What kind of an encouraging message is that? I don't know about you. What is all of this about? Is it just we're strangely subject to the tides of time that sweep over us? Well, because he says that. So if you look at that, what profit has he that works and everything that he labors? He's stuck in a paralysis of analysis here, and people get there. What's the point? I've seen the travail which God has given to the sons of men. They're exercised by your work. You work and then somebody else ruins it, and you do this and then this happens, and then you do your best and then this comes into your life, and you're healthy and you take vitamins and eat health food and then you get a disease, and all of this stuff. And yet he says in verse 11, he hath made everything beautiful in his time, and he has also set eternity in their heart. Now set the world in their heart is a bad translation. That word is never used in the Old Testament of the world. It is always forever. It is always eternity. It is always perpetual. That's our word in the original. It was never translated world in the English till probably the last 500-600 years. So Every Hebrew translator translated that eternity. God, Solomon says, has set eternity in our heart. These are the antagonistic ideas that we are subject to going through this life. Here are these tides, these things that roll over us. We're subject to them. We're born under this, set of stars or planets or conjuncture, and therefore, we got stuck in this, and this person, everything seems to go, and this person seems to go. That's one subject, and if we're going to live that way, we're just depressed. Antagonistic to that is this idea, well, no, God makes all things beautiful in His time, and He has set eternity in our hearts. And yet, we have no ability to search out everything He does from the beginning to the end. We can't understand all of His sovereignty. What do those first 8 verses do with us? The word time there 28 times. As believers, they're to cast us upon the rock of ages, of all ages. Cleft for me, let me hide myself in Thee. Time, birth, death, planting, uprooting, building, weeping, laughing. That God has a time for those things. I appreciate seeing those things of life through the lens of eternity. That God has spoiled me for this world. And I see that God allows those things to come to my life. I think of the families here that I know and love, that I have had the privilege to weep with some of you and laugh, and the seasons of life washing over us. At a wedding yesterday, and I always think the bride and groom are saying, through times of prosperity, through times of difficulty, through times of sickness and times of health, richer or poorer, better or worse. And I'm thinking, they have no idea why we say those things. And they're on video now making that commitment. Because those times come. They're here. Times of prosperity, time to build. Time of difficulty, time to tear down. Time of health, time of sickness. They come. This is so difficult, getting you through this. Well, that's the covenant we made, dying through health and through sickness. For better or for worse. I never thought it was going to be. It doesn't matter. You said better or worse. We got it on film. But through all of those things, for me, to see the hand of God and to be able to cry with some and laugh with others and throw your hands up and have your emotions run out and have nothing left except to know that the hand of God is there. And underneath are the everlasting arms. We either find that eternity is coming into view, antagonistic to the changes of life as they wash over us as we get older, that more and more eternity is being clarified, coming into view, or by hardening our hearts because of the things in this world, more and more we lose our view of eternity and we just become sarcastic and cynical and hardened, and what's the point and what's the use, because this is all, just I'm going to go sit with Mufasa and Simba somewhere on a rock and sing about the circle of life. What are we making provision for? Eternity? Or we spend our entire lives amassing things in this world. There's a time to get, but there's a time to throw out that are not going to last anyway. Isn't it interesting? He's saying here that man is distinct from all the rest of God's creation in that eternity is stamped on our hearts. You can take a little child when they start to talk, 3-4 years old, and they understand what forever is. Your dog can be 20 years old. He's never going to understand that. But a little kid, forever? I mean, we're going to live forever? They understand. There's something in them that resonates. And talk about God, talk about heaven. I think of some of the questions my kids asked when they were this big that I couldn't answer. Don't ask me that. I'm only a pastor. Eternity, I think, in our hearts makes our hearts ache through these first 8 verses. All other creatures are immersed in time. Jesus, in his earthly ministry, had a man say, Lord, I'll follow you anywhere. And he said, really? The foxes, they have their holes. And the birds of the air have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. There are creatures that are completely at home under the sun, under heaven. They're immersed in this world. The foxes, they're at home here. They have their hole. The birds of the air, they have their nests. They're at home here. You're going to follow me? Eternity is within me. Your eternal well-being is. There's an eternal plan. For me, I have no rest in this world. I have no place to lay my head. In fact, it's interesting, the only time it uses that word in regards to Christ that he laid his head, it said when he died on the cross that he bowed his head and he gave up the ghost, gave up the spirit. That's when he finally bowed his head in this world. That's the same word. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. That's where he had to lay his head when his work was done and he was passing into eternity. And yet in all of that, I look at him and I think, he didn't strive. But, time. I don't know about you. I read through that and I feel like there's never enough time. I set my watch a couple minutes fast because I'm always 5 minutes late. Been that way for 50 years. I don't know what it is. And I'm still 5 minutes late. And if I set it ahead 10 minutes, I'll still be 5 minutes late. And time gnaws at me because I'm spiritual. Eternity's in my heart. And I know I'm running out of time. But it just... when I come to church this morning, if somebody in front of me will always do 30 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone. And I can't blow the horn because I know they're going to come to church. If I give them the business, I know they're going to pull right in front of me. I've experienced that. You go to the checkout stand and the person in front of you thinks it's called the checkout stand because they take their check out when they get there. And then you're like, waiting for their check. Time is ticking away, And you go to the toll booth, and the guy in front of you throws the change into that thing and misses the basket. He has to get out and look for his quarter, rolling around under his car. You're like, And the Bible says the servant of the Lord shouldn't strive. And I find myself striving sometimes. Oh, Lord, come on, get this guy in front of me. He must believe in reincarnation. I'm only going to be here once, And yet Jesus... At the wedding at Cana, his mother said, they've run out of wine, son. They need your help. And he said, woman, what hast thou to do with me? My time has not yet come. Chapter 7, verse 30. Other places they want to throw him over the edge of a hill, and it says he passed through their midst because his time was not yet come. He prayed and he said, Father, my time has not yet come. And then he prayed and said, my Father, my time has come. And somehow... he seems, in the middle of the most extreme circumstances, patiently wading through birth and death, weeping and laughing, building and tearing down. Patience must be submitting to God's timetable. It tells us this in the Psalms. It says, my times are in thy hand. Have we submitted our day timers to God's timetable? Jesus, it says, even came forth in the fullness of time. Patience must be living according to God's timetable, somehow not striving. Yes, we live in a world where there's birth, there's death. There's planting, there's uprooting, there's building, there's tearing down, there's weeping, there's joy, there's war, there's peace. And yet, to me, looking at all of those things through the lens of eternity, he's made all things beautiful in his time. It says the steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord, that he delights. The steps of a good woman ordered by the Lord. And Solomon, I think, saying, you know what? I had everything of money, of this world. And still there was always something deeper gnawing at me because God had placed eternity in my heart. And much with John, he says to us not to love the world. Solomon says, I had it all. It's vanity. John says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, is not of the Father, but it's of the world. And the world passeth, ETH, is in the process, the tense is. The world is already passing away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. The world that we're living in today is already passing away. That is the condition that it is in. So as we look at verses 1 to 8, we should have temporary stamped on all of that in our lives. Time to be born, time to die. It's there. Building, tearing down, loving, hating, war, peace. Not fatalistic, but God speaking of eternity to us through all of those things. Telling us that in eternity, there's no sorrow, there's no suffering, there's no tears, there's no sickness, there's no death, there's no curse. And allowing time to wash over us, sharpening our view of those things that he has set in front of us in eternity. You know what? If you're here today, I pray you're not living your life. Look, religion is never going to do it for you. Religion ultimately ends up empty. You need the eternal one. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. We beheld his glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. We have the eternal one in our hearts. We have eternity, the eternal Christ dwelling within us that changes our view of life and of death and of sorrow and of joy. But religion will do you no good. And if you don't come to know the truth, you live your life fatalistically. What's the sense of trying? Why not commit suicide? People are born, people die. People plant and work and labor, and then someone else uproots it and tears it down. Somebody gathers stones together and someone else casts them away. There's someone laughing, there's someone crying. Someone trying to make peace and someone starting a war. Someone trying to promote love and someone promoting hate. There's nothing that we can do about it. Solomon says you can have this perspective. I saw the travail of all of that man is exercised by. It's futility. Or you can stand back and acknowledge, you know what? But something else gnaws at me. There's a deeper purpose to life. Eternity. Eternity. We don't die when our body dies. This is just the clay. It's just the spacesuit. It's wearing out. Mine is wearing out. I'm still in denial. Inside, I'm a kid. It's just my problem's this suitcase that I'm in. But eternity is in my heart. And I have hope in all of these things. I've had the privilege. Yesterday as I do the wedding, I thought, I was your grandmother's pastor. I was your mom's pastor. I dedicated you when you were an infant. I get to be your pastor. And if you guys will hurry up and have a baby, I can be pastor in 4 generations in your family. And if I live to be 78 or 79 and you have a kid, I can be a pastor in 5 generations in your family. And those generations are filled with birth and death, with weeping, and I have praised God for some of those tears, and with laughter, with building, with uprooting. There's been war and peace. But because the eternal one, the Rock of Ages, is with me, with you, He's able to make even those things beautiful in his time. Because eternity is in our hearts. It isn't that we understand all of his works from the beginning to the end. We will one day. Even as Christians, we have many unanswered questions that hang over our head. Even as believers, we come to the point sometime where these waves will go over our life and we do not have the resource to deal with them, and we end up emotionally bankrupt. We don't even have the tears, we don't even have the feelings, and we find ourselves running on empty, and the pain is so great. And then somehow God stoops down and he takes hold of us. And he reminds us that it's only time that is passing by, that one day we'll stand together on that other shore. That's what it's all about. I'm going to have the musicians come.